We got something going on in the Tennessee General Assembly right now. Obviously, the session continues. It's been an interesting session year in as much as some of the heavy lifting came right at the beginning of the Assembly as a special session was called by the governor of the state. We got the Education Freedom Act passed, and it will go into effect later on in the fall. We have Speaker of the House Cameron Sexton on with us to talk about activity going on in the session, but in particular in some of the committee hearings. And it's always a pleasure to talk to the Speaker of the House, Cameron Sexton. Hello, Cameron. Good afternoon.
Hey, man. How are you? Doing well.
I'm doing great, my friend. I mean, obviously, I want to tackle specific pieces of legislation that you are watching go through the General Assembly in your hopes of, when we will conclude said assembly. But obviously, the big news item is yet another blow up. I know you do your dead level best to keep things in order, as is your duty on the floor and in the various committee rooms. But we had a blow up between Representative Justin Pearson, who has been absent for most of the session, dealing with a family matter. And all of us are very, we understand that that's a very emotional time, and the tragic circumstances surrounding his family matter it's obviously touching all of our hearts. At the same time, the blow up yesterday has to matter in some ways regarding decorum in committee hearings. Just tell us what you know and what, if anything, your role would be into ensuring that these types of things don't happen in the House of Representatives.
Yeah, well, it seems like it always happens around, 2 to 3 of the same people, right? First of all, I think the other thing is what you're looking at is he had a bill, Representative Pearson in the committee. And then he makes a comment to the committee. Basically, I'm going to paraphrase. I don't have the exact quote, but to paraphrase, y'all aren't doing your jobs. You're allowing people to die out here. Y'all should be doing your jobs on this committee. And so, a couple of committee members took offense to that. And one responded back and said, look, we've been here doing our job. We're vetting these bills. We're asking questions about these bills. We're voting on bills. We're in committee. We understand that you've been absent for certain issues. But we've been here, right? And so the interesting thing is, once again, as we all know about Representative Pearson, he wants to play the victim, as always. Mm-hmm. And so he wanted to play the victim that they insulted his family in the crisis that his family went through, which was not the case at all. He is under, obviously, Representative Pearson's under a lot of emotional distress. And so he flew off the handle and went up, and he was going to look like he was going to try to start a fight there in committee. And people had to separate him. Representative Farmer never lost his cool, never said anything, never pointed, never did anything back. Representative Pearson was the aggressor. And so we're continuing to look at it. We also had a member from the public come up from there, which you can't do up there as well, whether it's for good or bad intentions. You can't come up there on the committee podium. So we're looking into that. But look, once again, it's Representative Pearson. We understand he's under a lot of emotional distress, but you cannot do that in the committee. You can't do that in the House. That's not the behavior that's acceptable. And I think everybody's tired of him always playing the victim, like the people are doing it, and it's not him himself that's losing control of his own abilities, which it is solely upon him.
Well, and I want to play the clip, and not so much for you, Mr. Speaker, but for the listening audience. And obviously, we had Representative Andy Farmer on yesterday, and he spoke about, his role in all of that and kind of his intention in saying what he said. And as you very well laid out, it was not so much that they were having any discussion about Representative Pearson's personal matters. It was that Representative Pearson was accusing the committee of not doing the committee's job simply because the committee did not appear to agree with his bill. And here's what Representative Andy Farmer, so everybody knows what we're talking about, said on committee that got Representative Pearson so upset.
We need to do something about the gun violence epidemic. We have the power to do something about the gun violence epidemic, and we don't just have to offer some empty thoughts and prayers.
I don't think it's fair for you to come in front of this committee and lecture us on hard work and convictions and hard work for our committee. So when I understand where you're at and what you're doing and why, but at the end of the day, we've been here working.
It is a pathetic excuse for you to not answer the question of why we are doing nothing about the gun violence epidemic than to personally attack me. But let me explain to you what I have been doing, Representative, since you asked. My brother, Temperance Darnell Pearson, one of the loves of my life, passed away from gun suicide on December 1st of 2024.
And see, here's the thing, Mr. Speaker. I did not hear where Representative Farmer said anything about his personal situation, said anything about his family situation, really. And now what Justin is doing is running around claiming that Representative Farmer attacked his family, which you and I both know is not true.
No, it's not true. And now the far left is now trying to put threats on Representative Farmer back at his home, right? Because that's what the left wants to do. That's what they try to do. That's what Representative Pearson is allowing to happen. But if you listen to your clip, he's the one who brought up his family, and he's the one that brought up that. Look, we understand that he blames violence on guns. We blame it on the people, right? And the people should be arrested, and it's just a difference of philosophy. The problem is, unfortunately, Representative Pearson cannot handle people who disagree with him. You see it on the floor, you see it in committee, you see it in public. And yes, he has missed committee meetings, or floor sessions, and sometimes we get an excuse before session, sometimes we get the excuse halfway through session. Sometimes we have to ask the leader camper if he's coming today or not, and she calls, and then we get an email saying he's not going to be there that day. But yet he wants to show up at the school board meeting in Memphis and not come to the floor session. He wants to show up at the DRC event when they elected new people in Washington or wherever it was, but not show up for floor event. So, look, I get what he's trying to do, and I'm sure he's under a lot of pressure and a lot of emotional distress. But him lashing out at someone for doing something that they did not do, that he's claiming they did, is just him being solely a victim again, and that is his MO.
Well, and look, to put a fine point on it, Mr. Speaker, it occurs to me, and I'd be curious if you agree. I mean, like he has done in the past, he uses a tragedy, and it's a tragedy, no doubt, but he seems to use that as some sort of emotional shield to prevent an honest disagreement about how best to move this state forward with regard to gun violence.
Well, the thing is, what's your definition of gun violence, right?
That's right.
Like we've done a lot of work to try to help with mental health conditions, to help people where there's a suicide prevention line. We try to put people in place where you can get the help that you need before you want to commit suicide. That's a very valid question and a very valid point that we're trying to work through, which we could probably work with Representative Pearson on, knowing the situation that him and his family tragically went through. But he's taking that instance and moving into a gun violence thing, just like we had a member on the House floor that there was a dispute in Memphis, but at 1:30 in the morning between two people downtown at a bar. They got into an argument, and somebody shot somebody. They call that gun violence. Well, that's a disagreement, right? And so what the left tries to do is use everything that happens as gun violence. And that's why we had a bill back in the day, a couple of years ago, that tried to define what a mass shooting was, because they define mass shootings as gang violence. They describe mass shootings as domestic violence issues. Mm-hmm. They want to blame the gun on every instance. And so that's where they're wanting to go. They're wanting to attack everybody's Second Amendment rights. We're not going to allow them to infringe on the Second Amendment rights. We have a bill currently that's going to allow, hopefully if it gets to the House floor, permitting of long guns. I'm sure there'll be a long debate about that. At the end of the day, it's a mental health condition that we need to put more resources to. It's not so much about gun violence in that instance, in my opinion. He can have his opinion. It's really about mental health.
As we sit here today, it occurs to me that it is the second anniversary of the tragedy at Covenant School. Are you comfortable, Mr. Speaker, that the House has done everything that we can do to protect the rights of law-abiding citizens and at the same time go as far as we can go with regard to mental health issues that oftentimes result in gun violence that we hear about? I mean, just broadly, do you feel like the General Assembly has done what it can do?
I think as far as people wanted to impose on your rights, we've protected the Second Amendment rights. I think there's a lot of conversations around mental health, but if you go back to the special session that we had after the Covenant shooting and the tragedy there at Covenant, what we found out was that the person was under physician's care. The person made threats or let the physician understand that they were going to make threats to that school and to others. There was a certain statute on the books where that physician was supposed to report to law enforcement those threats. That's not protected information under the Hippocratic Oath or HIPAA or anything else when someone makes threats. We went back in and strengthened that provision to make sure that if someone's under the health care of a doctor and they make mass threats, that should go to law enforcement. That was a breakdown in the system.
Mm-hmm.
We understand that they had other things going on. We fixed that. They were able to purchase weapons. I mean, you look at that situation, and so you try to see where the breakdowns were. And we went back in special session to try to fix those things. And we're still working with some groups out there on trying to make sure that felons can't get guns, that felons, if they're caught with guns, it's an enhancement. And so we're trying to do everything that we can to protect people. But it's a very delicate balance between me protecting your Second Amendment rights, Matt, because you haven't done anything wrong. We haven't imposed on you. We shouldn't impose on you.
That's right.
Compared to someone who has who's under a doctor's care, who's under mental health. That's why we made it easier for voluntary commitments. We changed that definition, or involuntary commitments, because the hurdle was too high if a physician thought they should be there, because it was a threat, an immediate threat, not an imminent threat. An immediate threat means right now, this minute.
Mm-hmm.
And so the covenant shooter did not fall under the involuntary commitment clause because it wasn't a threat immediate. It was an imminent threat. Well, it didn't cover it. So we changed that to now allow that to where if someone's making an imminent threat, we can turn them over to law enforcement and get them under the supervision of a physician to hold them for a little bit.
Talking with Speaker of the House Cameron Sexton about issues relating to and surrounding the blow up with Representative Justin Pearson, attempting to, it seemed to me, get into a physical altercation with Representative Andy Farmer. Along those lines, Cameron, what, if anything, are the parameters regarding attendance? This has just spiked my curiosity. So I suppose that it's ultimately up to the individuals that vote these folks into office to govern their attendance in session. Is there anything that would trigger? I mean, and I'm not suggesting that this would be a case where you would utilize that, but I mean, is there any mechanism by which you would? How does that work? How does all that work? How do you know when people are in attendance and when they're not in session?
Well, if it's in session when we're on the floor, we have the roll call in the beginning and roll call at the end to determine if someone's there and their votes on various bills. We have members who are absent for whatever reasons. We don't ask them why they're not going to be there. They say, I'm not going to be able to make it today, and we excuse their absences. Some do it a week in advance. Some do it the morning of. There's no rhyme or reason. We don't have anything that says you have to be there for every single day of session or anything else.
Right.
That's up on the member, and that goes back to the district who they're representing and for them to know. But we keep records of all that. We keep records of how often they're in the committee process. I'm sure the media could check into that with the clerk's office to see how many days he missed on the floor and how many committee meetings he missed. Look, if he can't make it for reasons, so be it. But at the end, you can't sit here and keep playing the victim, and that he wants to do. And look, his MO is when he gets mad is he wants to pick a fight. He tried to do it with me on the House floor. He tried to do it with Representative Farmer. That seems to be his operation of how he works, unfortunately. And, I think people are seeing kind of who he is.
And just to note, and you and I have discussed this in the past, but for new listeners out there that are curious, after the expulsion of Pearson and Jones due to their outburst and refusal to follow the rules on the House floor a couple of years ago, you and leadership set some other rules, as voted by the House of Representatives, in place to give you other alternatives as opposed to expulsion. Just walk us through the rationale behind that and what other possible punitive measures there are for those who cannot follow the rules.
Yeah, I mean, look, so when the House rules were set that we had used, and we pretty much adopt the same rules year in, year out, the body had never experienced people doing what they did on the House floor that day. So the rules were not in place to handle that situation. The only two things you could do is censure or expel. There was no middle road. We talked to legal, we talked to our ethics attorney, we talked to a lot of people, and those were the only two options we had. And so it's either you thought it was just a censure, or you're going to have to remove them. Since then, what we've done is we put in place some middle grounds where we could we can remove them from the House floor, that we can put them on voting remotely from the building so they get the right to vote, but they're not in the chamber, which is what some other state legislatures have done. We could still remove them from committees and that sort of stuff if that's the direction we want to do. But we also put in place that you can't just arbitrarily the first time you do something that's the case. So in order to get to the point where you get to expulsion or suspension, or you get to a point where you're voting remotely from a certain area within the Cordell Hull building, you would have to make almost up to 3 instances been called out of order. So it's not a rash decision to get to that point. It's a repeated violation of the House rules that will get you there. So we try to set up a process that allows us more variance, more ability to handle the situation. It doesn't limit that we can't move straight to expulsion, but it does set in place parameters where it's just not one instance that happens, it's multiple.
And as Speaker, are you continuing to look into this situation that happened the other day to make sure that you're doing what is necessary? In other words, are you considering some sort of punishment based on what we saw in committee?
We're still working through it. We're talking to the Democrat caucus, and, I'm happy that they're having conversations with Representative Pearson. They're engaged with him in trying to cure this situation as well. Whether or not he listens, I don't know, but we're going to continue to look at maybe some conversations. There may be a consequence or not, maybe a warning about it. We'll have to wait and see. We're going to have those ongoing conversations, just like we're going to have the ongoing conversations with the person who came out of the public off from the where they were seating up there on the thing, all in good intention. But Matt, if you're out there and you're watching the ball game and you run on the court, there's a consequence for running on the court. You should know better than to do that. So we're having to have those conversations as well, unfortunately.
See, I like that. Coming from a good Tennessee man, you circle it all the way back to the basketball tournament. Yeah, I like that, Cameron. You excited about tomorrow night? Well, as we wrap up, I've got to ask you this unrelated question. You excited about tomorrow night? Should be a lot of fun. Should
be good. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Look, hopefully Kentucky won't beat us 3 times in 1 year, but we'll see. We'll see. I think Tennessee's ready to play is going to be a great game, and that's why I think they have it on late, is because the West Coast will be prime time, and I think that's the game they want everybody to see.